Hey everyone, Rick here, and folks, this is the final social media showdown battle for Battlefields of Mana. And this time we have Dr. Professor Hazmat representing YouTube and the Lunar Knights. And we also have Ben S, aka Mr. Man, also representing YouTube and the Lunar Knights. Wait, what's going on? That's right, this is going to be a civil war. We have Lunar Knights up against Lunar Knights. Now look at this. This is quite the army. The good doctor has 2 archers, 2 swordsmen, 2 peasant militia, and a unit of heavy cavalry. That's 7 units, the largest army so far. Of course, the vast majority of these are low cost. 2 points apiece for archers, 2 points apiece for swordsmen, and a point apiece for peasant militia, whereas we have a big chunky 5-point unit of heavy cavalry. Now, Mr. Man has a completely different army. I think this may be the first time that the 2 armies competing in this battle have completely different unit types. So, for Ben, we have 2 units of spearmen at 2 points apiece, a unit of flail bearers at 4 points, a unit of foot crossbowmen at 3 points, and a unit of mounted crossbowmen for 4 points. 5 units to 7 units, and it's Lunar Knights on Lunar Knights, folks. This is the 5th and final matchup. We will be back after deployment. Okay, folks, deployment is done. Mr. Man won the roll-off to pick a side, deploy first, and go first. So, part of that is unfortunate, but on the other hand, he was able to choose the side once again with cover. Now, the reason that was kind of unfortunate is, of course, because he only has 5 units, whereas the good doctor has 7. So by the time we put out all of our 5, Doctor still had 3 units left, especially that unit of heavy cavalry. Ben has 2 of these spear units with polearm, which would have been fantastic to use to gang up on those cav. However, it ended up working out okay anyway, because at least 1 unit of spearmen is across from the cavalry unit. Not saying that that's where the cavalry will end up going, but so what was the reason for this look? Well, crossbowmen right there. Foot crossbowmen moving into the forest and then can just shoot out with their superior offensive capabilities. Now, mounted crossbowmen just deployed way down here. This was kind of early on, so this unit has a lot of options of where it wants to set itself. And of course, the benefit of being mounted is it is incredibly fast, so it can get out of danger. And then we also have flail bearers. Now, with the ranged units over here, we kind of, just from experience of battles past, it's always come down to these flail bearers and other strong units getting picked apart before they can get to their target. So I'm sticking them here so they can at least get the cover bonus of the forest before eventually finding their target. And then spears here to move through the center, spears there to move on that side. At the time, we didn't know where the cavalry would be. So the good doc deployed swordsmen. A melee unit over here to assist the archers. We have peasant militia also there to assist the archers, or maybe to escort the swordsmen into combat. And of course, the heavy cavalry. Honestly, the heavy cav wants to get involved with those flail bearers. We saw that in the last game. And peasant militia as well. To tie up anyone who tries to get involved with the heavy cavalry that we don't want, including those spearmen. So we'll see if that ends up happening. We'll be back at the end of round 1. All right, folks, this is the end of round 1. Is that not just an absolutely gorgeous sight? I mean, look at this battle line. So Ben moved the mounted crossbows up just enough. Even if they had moved their full amount, they still wouldn't be able to get anybody in range. So they just moved up, so now people are going to be in range next turn. However, they moved up just far enough away so that when those archers moved their full distance, they would not be able to hit those mounted cavalry, or mounted crossbowmen, which is exactly what we want. Spearmen here move just straight up. We have the crossbows now in the woods. They were unable to target anyone yet. Flail bearers also now in the woods. Spearmen move straight up. It's as simple as that. So for the good doctor, swordsmen up as far as they can, which is a decent idea, because now if these crossbowmen remain here, they can start moving that way, or if the crossbowmen leave, they can wheel and move that way. Archers moved up and took shots at these spearmen, doing no wounds. Not even a single hit. It was a complete miss. Peasant militia moved straight up here. These swordsmen shifted over and moved up, so they are comfortably behind the peasant militia. These archers moved up and took shots at those spearmen, doing a single wound. They had the option. Do they go after the flail bearers in the woods, or do they go after those spearmen? Those flail bearers would get a dodge roll, and they're thinking maybe we want to weed out some of those spearmen, especially since they also then decided to move the cavalry. They shifted the cavalry over, moved up as far as they could, just enough. They had just enough movement to get in front of those archers. So now the cavalry may have to tangle with the spearmen. We'll see what Ben ends up doing with those. Peasant militia, though, moving up over there to try to dissuade them from getting any closer to the cavalry, but we'll see what ends up happening. That is all of the movement. There was 2 shots, only 1 wound. We are now moving into round 2. All right, folks, this is the end of Mr. Man's turn 2. So, very interesting. So obviously we're outnumbered. We have to make the most of the opportunities we have. So, flail bearers moved as far as they could, which is right to the edge of the woods. They're still going to get a cover save if those archers decide to take shots at them. I don't know who else they might consider taking shots at this point. Our spearmen, you had to double move, but they were able to get into the front rank of those heavy cavalry. So that is significant for 2 reasons. One, it means we are going to go first in the first round of that combat, which will probably happen on the doctor's turn. But also, it stops the heavy cavalry from getting collision hits. If the heavy cav moves into contact with an opponent, they get D6 collision hits. But when their opponent moves into contact with them, they do not get those collision hits. Now, we may end up being flanked by those peasant militia, but that's a future Mr. Man problem, not something we need to concern ourselves with at this point, because that's a 2-point unit of spearmen holding up 5, potentially 6 points of troops. That's a pretty good ratio. And our crossbowmen over here, look at this, holy smokes. Now, they could have moved up potentially, and I don't even know if they would have had the range. In order to hit these archers, they would have had to move up to about there. I don't even know if they could have done that, since the movement is hindered in the woods. But either way, they figured, we might as well start whittling down this other peasant militia unit to get it kind of out of the way. So yeah, 6 shots, 5 wounds. So that whole back rank of that peasant militia unit almost imploded. Spearmen over here wheeled and are moving in. Not entirely sure what the doctor is going to do. So we moved up to this position. We're going to take a volley from the archers for sure. No problem. We're going to see what these swordsmen want to do, because that's the whole point. Make your opponent uncomfortable. Does the doctor now want to reform these swordsmen and attack the spears? But doing so is going to give our flank to these mounted crossbows, and that's not good either. So we'll see what ends up happening. But these mounted crossbows, speaking of them, took shots at the swordsmen and, already have eliminated 1. So, and they had to move up to do that. The swordsmen had only moved up just far enough so that they were out of their range. So the mounted crossbowmen had to move up a little bit, which penalized their shots, but even still, they got 2 wounds killed off a swordsman. So a decent amount of damage done in Ben, aka Mr. Man's turn 2. We are now moving over to the good doctor's turn 2. All right, folks, this is Dr. Professor Hazmat's turn 2 concluded. What did he do? First, these swordsmen decided to move in. They had enough speed to get into close contact with the mounted crossbowmen. Of course, what they're hoping for is for the mounted crossbowmen to fail to break away on their next turn so that they can engage in a close combat. So it took both movement actions to get there. The crossbowman did get a free volley off, killing a swordsman. We'll see what happens next turn. Now, that means these archers moved back slightly because the spearmen are coming at them. They don't want to be involved in a close contact. They definitely don't want to be charged. These spearmen now will have to use both of their movement actions next turn in order to get into contact with them. So they backed up just a bit. Now that does mean they suffer from a move and shoot penalty, but they still fired a volley and killed off a spearman. Peasant militia moved in. They figured, you know what? We might as well absorb the blows. That's a 3-point unit of crossbows. This is only a 1-point unit of peasant militia. Let's just move them in. It took both their movement actions. They are now in close contact. However, they did suffer several casualties thanks to the free volley. Now, over here, swordsmen moved in and shuffled over. So now when these flail bearers want to get in here, they're going to be up. They're not going to be able to get to those archers, essentially. They're going to have to go up against the swordsmen. The archers did take a shot at the flail bearers. The woods doing their thing, though, only suffering a wound. This combat was a little tough. So first of all, peasant militia used both of their moves to reform and move into the flank, so they were not involved in this combat. But between the spearmen and the heavy cavalry, the spearmen had a pretty darn good offensive role, but the defense of the heavy cavalry negated most of it, only taking a wound, whereas the spearmen took several wounds in return. So it did mean that so far there are 3 casualties over here. There's 6 over here. Of course, the vast majority of them are peasant militia. That said, at the end of round 2, the game's a third over. We're going to begin round 3 in a second, but at the end of round 2, Ben S., Mr. Man, is leading 0.5 point to 0. All right, folks, we'll be back after Mr. Man's turn 3. All right, folks, the end of turn 3 for Ben S., a.k.a. Mr. Man. Honestly, we haven't had this much excitement this early in a game in quite a while. The first 2 battles came down to the final combats. In one case, the final die roll of the game to determine a winner. The last 2, just due to some unfortunate rolls, we almost had victories in round 3. Now, this is seriously anybody's game. All right, so let's start off down here. Mounted crossbowmen successfully broke away. You get a free reform when you break away. They shot up 6 inches, reformed back around, and fired. I rolled so bad in defense for these poor swordsmen. There were 4 hits, and I rolled 4 2s in defense, so they took 4 wounds, eliminating 2 more swordsmen. These crossbowmen also successfully broke away. They were only able to move back an inch because they were moving backwards at half speed and through a forest at half speed, so it was basically quartered speed, and they only have movement of 4. Now, these guys were able to, move, reform, and shoot because they have the nimble special ability, which is why mounted crossbowmen are fantastic. Of course, foot don't have that kind of special ability, so even though they could have gotten a free reform for breaking away and then move at full speed, if they would have then reformed, they wouldn't have been able to shoot. So they didn't get the free reform so that they could back up 1 inch, which counts as 4 inches, and shot at the peasant militia. Now, 6 shots at the peasant militia, they ended up doing 2 wounds. And so we still have a banner bearer remaining. All right, because they had a move and shoot penalty as well. And I can't remember if I mentioned they also had a move and shoot penalty. Over here, the spearmen decided to keep going this way. Now, they could have come after these guys, but of course, that would have opened their rear to those archers. And now these swords are kind of stuck in limbo. But anyway, so the archers did get a free volley off. and did only a wound. The gamble paid off. Of course, it took both movement actions to get over there. So the spearmen are hoping that those archers will fail to break away. But the good doctor's hoping those archers do break away, just like these crossbowmen were able to break away over here. Also, up here, the flail bearers use both of their movement to move into contact with the swords. They like that matchup. These archers are engaged. Those archers cannot shoot over their own engaged friendly units, so I don't know if we can even get an angle where they'd even be able to shoot at them. So those flail bearers are going to be unfettered going up against those swordsmen. These spears, they just simply brace themselves. Again, that's a 2-point unit of spears holding up 6 points over here. They like that. Let's just hold them as long as we can. That is a lot. That was turn 3 for Mr. Man. Now turn 3 for the good doctor. All right, folks, round 3 is now over. This was the end of Dr. Professor Hazmat's turn 3. Let's see what happens. Swordsman just backed up. So you move backwards at half speed. That's as far back as they could get, which is just enough to be out of range of the mounted crossbows. The swordsmen say, hey, if you want to finish us off, you're going to have to come get us, which means they're going to get a move and shoot penalty for moving up and then taking shots. And again, that's a 2-point unit of swords. That's a 4-point unit of mounted crossbows. So they are kind of, they're doing their part anyway. Over here, the archers failed to break away, so they're bracing themselves for the melee attack that's about to happen. This peasant militia guy just moved at full speed out of the woods. That's as far as he could get. He's almost in the rear of the flail bearers, but I don't think he wants to go there. He's saving half a point, essentially. He wants to see if he can come over here and hide behind this building, I think. These archers had to use both their moves to back up slightly and reform, so they are now looking at the flank of these spears. So next turn, the good doctor will have a flank shot with those archers on the spears. These spears, this combat, well, let's talk here first. These swords brace themselves, so they don't like what's going on with these flail bearers. On Mr. Man's next turn, those flail bearers are going to be rolling 12 dice, and any 6s rolled explode. So every 6 rolled is another die, and if any of those dice are 6s, they explode. And that chain can go on indefinitely. So we have potential for a bloodbath over here. So those swordsmen brace themselves. These spearmen, there is still a spearman. Actually, he has a wound on him because he is down to 1 point of health, but because he survived, and on his next turn, he's going to brace himself. So he has held up 6 points for this entire game so far, 2/3 of the way through, or at least half. Yeah, well, we'll see. It may be 2/3, but yeah, by the end of round 4, So, yeah. Well, I guess, anyway, I'm talking about tactics, thinking about what I'm going to do. These heavy cav could potentially break away and move into contact with the flank of those flail bearers. We'll see what they end up doing, but that spearman is still alive. Can you believe it? The peasant militia in the flank, I believe, did a wound, and actually this one shouldn't be here either, because they had a wound on them, and the spearmen were only able to do 1 more wound, so that took off a heavy cav. All right, and that is everything from the doctor's turn 3. Now we're going to be at the top of round 4 with Mr. Man. All right, folks. God, I just want to apologize now because to Mr. Man, I rolled so poorly. All right, so here's what happened. Well, good news first. Let's talk good news first. Mounted crossbows moved up. They had a move and shoot penalty, but they were still able to kill a swordsman. Unfortunately, they couldn't finish off that unit of swordsmen, so we have a banner bearer there. These crossbows were able to finally kill off the peasant militia unit, so they're back in the action. The spearman up here braced himself for whatever's to come. These flail bearers, 12 dice. I only rolled 1 6, and that 6 exploded into a 1. So that was a miss. And the rest of the dice are like 3s and 4s. It was the worst attack roll of all time. The bracing swordsman blocked everything, not a single wound. In return, the swordsman did 3 wounds, killing off 2 flail bearers. That is an absolute upset. Down here, it wasn't the best. The spears were only able to do a single wound to the archers, and the archers in return did a single wound to the spears. So a couple of misses, a couple of meh, and now we are moving on to the good doctor's turn 4. Oh my gosh, when it rains, it pours. So this was the doctor's turn 4, and here is what happened. All right, so because that spearman was outnumbered, the heavy cavalry was able to break away without even having to test for it. So they charged into the flank of these flail bearers. Now, in doing so, they got collision hits, but they didn't score a single wound. And then in close combat, they only did a wound. Flail bearers had someone in the back rank there who allocated his attacks to the heavy cav, doing no wounds. The flail bearers were able to take out or do 3 wounds to the swordsman, but the swordsman in return, I think, did 3 wounds to the flail bearers, so that killed off 2 more flail bearers. That unit's now cut in half. The peasant militia were able to eliminate that last spearman and reformed. I think they're going to try to go around the woods maybe to those crossbows. These archers shot right into the flank of the spearmen, really crippling that unit. These archers, though, failed again to break away, so they're bracing themselves. This little swordsman moved back as far as it could. If there is one benefit to being whittled down to just a banner bearer, it is that you become a single figure. So units have to wheel and reform and have movement penalties for moving side to side or backwards. But when you are a single figure, there is no wheeling, you don't have flanks or rears, so you basically can move your full distance in any direction. And so that way they were able to move 8 inches that way. It's not going to save them, potentially, unless these mounted crossbows, they'll definitely be able to get over here and shoot them unless a miracle happens and that swordsman survives and maybe somehow ducks around over there somehow. But it is now going to be top of round 5, starting with Mr. Man. Oh man, just a terrible, terrible turn 5 for Mr. Man. Mounted crossbows move down 6 shots. Even with the move to fire penalty, they're still straight up die rolls. Only a single wound on that swordsman. Oh, God. These spears. They really had no choice. They don't like being shot in the flank here. But if they break away, they're just going to get shot at anyway. So they stuck around in close combat, hoping to do some wounds so that maybe they could cut that unit of archers in half eventually. They were unable to do a single wound. Instead, the archers did a wound back to them. And we simply braced ourselves with the flail bearers at this point. You can't break away when you're outnumbered by 2 units like this. And the crossbows moved up as far as they could. So now they can get shots in at the heavy cavalry to try to cut that unit in half. That's the next juiciest target, but oh my gosh, so many points left on the board. So right now, what's the score? Well, we'll talk about that after Dr. Professor Hazmat's turn 5. All right, round 5 is now over. Good news and bad news. Bad news is, well, I guess depending on whose side you're on. So these archers I originally was going to have them. I actually did try to break away with them, but they failed yet again. These archers took shots into the flank, 3 wounds. That banner bearer is all that's left with a wound on him. These archers, I was originally going to have brace themselves, but I thought, you know what? Worst case scenario, this spearman does break away, and now that he's not a unit, he's a single figure, and he's much more mobile, he could duck around behind this dwelling, and these 2 ranged units having to wheel and pivot and maneuver wouldn't be able to also get shots off in the last round. So he may try to escape. So instead, we had the archers engage in a close combat, and they did no wounds. And then that spearman in return also, I don't believe, did anything either. But they're just sitting there now, which is, I guess, good news for the spearman. He survived unbelievably. So then, up here, these peasant militia reformed and are moving down this way. Unfortunately, not far enough to block shots from the crossbows on the heavy cavalry, but they got to do something. Then in this melee, and also this other swordsman ran up as far as it could. It'll be interesting to see. I am pretty sure, because what's going to have to happen is this is going to have to move up. Oh, that's going to be so close. Yikes. I don't know if that mounted crossbowman unit is going to be able to do it, because they have a movement of 6 and they are nimble, so they can move twice, but they're going to have to reform somehow to still be able to get a shot in at that swordsman. So they're going to have to move up to about there. Looks like maybe they can move up 6 inches to there, reform, and then still barely be able to get a shot off. Because if any of those back archers were in the way, they wouldn't be able to get the shots off. Because I want that extra point, gosh darn it. So we'll see, but that's for future time. Now in this close combat, this was absolutely insane. They braced with the swordsmen so that they would avoid getting hit, because the flail bearers, they could have taken out that back rank of swords. That's a victory point. So they braced with the sword so they wouldn't be involved in this combat. So it was just heavy cavalry, which shifted over. You always want to maximize the amount of troops in combat. So they shifted over, so they got the most in. Not a single wound. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. Now, not a single wound back either. But those flail bearers are still there. If they can hold on one more turn, because that's 3 points just sitting there right now. We're not going to calculate points yet because a lot's going on. We will be back at the end of Mr. Man's turn 6. Okay, folks, this is one of those rare occurrences. We are mid-turn 6 for Mr. Man, and this is going to determine whether we even play the Doctor's turn 6. Because that's how close this actually is right now. So just to recap what ended up happening, these crossbows fired into the heavy cavalry, dealing enough wounds where there was only one heavy cav in the back rank with only a wound left on him. Over here, the mounted crossbowmen were able to get up here and wheel just enough to get a shot in on that last swordsman, killing him. And then with this spearman, it was so close, hoping to break away and duck behind this building, unable to break away, so he's bracing himself. These flail bearers, heavy cav won the initiative. They did 2 wounds and killed 1 flail bearer. The flail bearer in return dedicated all 3 of its dice on the heavy cav, did 1 wound, killing the last heavy cav in the back rank, which is a victory point. So now the swordsmen are what we're about to roll for, because it is tied right now, if you can believe it. So Mr. Man has 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, a point for having that unit of heavy cavalry. So that's 4 points for Mr. Man and 4 points for the Doctor by cutting that spearman unit in half for 1, flail bearers for 2, and killing the entire spearman unit there for 2. It is 4-4. Now, I've already rolled for the swordsman. They got 6 dice. They needed 3s or better. This is all they got, a 5 and a 6. The flail bearer has no special defensive ability, so he'll get 2 dice in defense. He only has 2 HP, 2 health points, so he needs at least a 5 on 2 dice in order to stay alive. If he is killed, that's 3 more points for the Doctor, and Ben's turn is over. So we wouldn't even need to play the doctor's turn because he's already winning. And in fact, I originally was going to have the flail bearer brace, but then I was like, wait, then on the doctor's turn, he can just say, oh, I don't do anything because he's already ahead in points, so he doesn't need to have anybody attack. That's when I said, okay, so we're going to not brace, and he attacked and actually cut that unit in half. So now it is tied. So if we get a 5 here, if Ben S., Mr. Man, gets a 5 here, we have to play the doctor's final turn 6. But we need a 5 here. Nope, it's over. Oh, God. I'm so sorry, Mr. Man. So both of these hits get through. That kills the final flail bearer. Boom. And it is now 2, 4, 5 points. Wait, no. 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 points to 4. And it is now the doctor's turn. And the doctor just says, nope, I'm done. There's no way to come back from that for Ben, and the doctor doesn't need to do anything on his final turn. So that is it. This last clip, which I was going to just do a little mid-turn, kind of see what's going on situation, ended up being the final clip. This is it. This is match 5 between viewer-submitted armies. They've all been just an absolute blast to play. But in the end, Dr. Professor Hazmat scored 2 points for the spears, 4 points for the flail bearers, and 1 point for cutting that unit of spearmen in half or more. So that is a total of 7 points. Mr. Man came back valiantly to tie it up at 4 by killing off a whole unit of swordsmen, a unit of peasant militia, and cutting a unit of heavy cavalry in half for 4 points. So final score is 7-4. Dr. Professor Hazmat with the victory. So who were the MVPs and all that? Well, you know, on Mr. Man's side of things, those spearmen were incredibly good because, I mean, that one spearman was holding up all those points for so long. The flail bearers, I just really suck at rolling, apparently, for attacks for flail bearers. These mounted crossbows, the ranged units always do pretty well. Overall, no one, it really stood out to me too much. It was just the survival of a lot of the units that was impressive when they were down to a single guy or what have you. So, for example, on this next turn, say Dr. Professor Hazmat still wanted to actually take a turn, well, more than likely 6 dice from those archers on this last spearman here, needing, and since it's down to a banner bearer, he doesn't have flanks or anything anymore, so these are just straight up dice needing 3s or better. And so 2 misses and a 3, 5, 5, 6 is what the attack roll ends up being. And that spearman still has a wound on him as well. So 4 defense dice. You can't use that brace die against range attacks. And this is the kind of stuff that I've been rolling for Mr. Man, unfortunately. 2 1s do nothing. A 3 and a 5 block, a 3 and a 5, but a 5 and a 6 would get through. 2 wounds, he'd be dead as well. Of course, we're not doing that. The game is over. But that just goes to show you that even if that spearman had survived, then this one would have died and it'd still be game over. And then the heavy cav and all that would still have attacked that spearman and probably killed him as well. But anyway, that's where we are going to conclude it. Stay tuned on the Battlefields of Mana channel. I'm super excited to begin the campaign, which is going to be all of this. So I created and printed this gorgeous map using the Incarnate map tool. Just the free one, not the pro that you have to pay for. But we have 39 provinces. 39 provinces, Lunar Knights, Regal Guard, and Marauders. Marauders have taken over. I won't go into all the details here, but every province has a name and a card and all that. All right. That's it, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. I do truly appreciate it, and until next time.